You guys are early. I'm so proud of you. Hi, Noah. I'm going to see if I can pause this recording. Okay. And since it's going to be recorded, I'm going to just go ahead and start. It's right about 6 o'clock. And so I wanted to thank you guys for attending, even though it's on Zoom. And thank you for your last minute change of not in person and only in Zoom. Hopefully it's actually easier on some of you, and we may decide to do all of our future parent meetings on Zoom. We also have the UTEP Speech and Language Department here with us. So if you see some names on there that you don't recognize from ELB, they are part of our speech affiliation. So welcome UTEP and Dr. Rao. They're joining us this evening, and we will have some slides that have to do with expressive and receptive language. So I'll ask them if they have anything that they want to add when we get to that section. Like I said, this Zoom is being recorded, and part of the reason behind that is so that we can upload it to our YouTube channel after it's finished. One of the big goals for ELB is to be a community resource. And so we would like to start to put more resources out there that you guys can refer back to later or share with your friends. In the presentation, I do have some Q&A sections built in, but if you have a question and you're afraid you might forget, go ahead and type it in the chat, and then we'll go back and check those out if we need to. Parenting can be challenging, but remember that you have a great support system in us here at ELB, but also in each other. And so feel confident to go ahead and share your successes and maybe some of your struggles with each other, because in that communication is how we build our tools for our parenting toolbox. So that's one of the reasons we like to try to have parent nights in person, so that you guys can actually mingle with each other as well and share stories. But Zoom, I think, will work just as well. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get started with the terrible twos and three-nagers. I love that term, three-nagers, because 3-year-olds can sometimes act like teenagers. The goals and objectives for this presentation are to understand the developmental stage of 2- and 3-year-olds, what's going on with them developmentally, understand behavior as a form of communication, and also what we can do as adults and caregivers to support young children. So first, we're going to look at the development of kids at age 2. At ELB, we use multiple resources just to understand where kids are coming from in the developmental stages, and knowing what's average for kids helps us to identify the pieces of development, and then to be able to plan specific activities for practicing, and also understanding that those developmental milestones are unique to the child. The stages and the progression of development should really be thought of as a spectrum of time. And so usually when you see development, you see a range of months. And that's important because sometimes your child could develop on the earlier side or the later side of that stage. And sometimes it even takes them a little bit longer. And that doesn't mean that there's necessarily a problem. It just means that we can help them with different strategies make it through to the next stage. Each kiddo might have a different path to their developmental stage. Not every child will do things in the same sequence of order, and that's okay. We know what's average, but it's okay to be on different ends of that spectrum. when we understand development and what's considered to be typical, then we can provide better instruction and better communication, which will help us also build better relationships with our kids. Oops. So when you get to the 2-year-old stage, you no longer have an infant, and sometimes you might be asking yourself, what is wrong with my baby, right? And I like this little graphic here because kids at 2 years old think that they are the center of our universe. And sometimes we allow them to be the center of our universe because when they were infants, they depended 100% on us. So I just think this is a cute little graphic to help illustrate what's going on for a 2-year-old, and they're starting to understand the world outside of themselves. The human brain develops more rapidly in the first 5 years than any other time of life and even years put together. So this is really a window of opportunity for us as adults in their life to help them develop in a safe and strong way. And you'll also notice that there's a lot of personality changes in your little one. The personality starts to develop, and it's really fun to watch. But the way that we respond to those developing characteristics will help nurture positive characteristics for later on in life. Okay, next slide. So here did I skip a slide? No, I didn't. Sorry. So here we're looking at the area of physical development. And I just went through here. This particular resource is from a CLI. And those of you that are ELB parents, this is the continuum that we often share with you guys. If you've already had your parent-teacher conference, some of these will be familiar to you. But the reason that I'm pointing this out is because we're looking at the change in development from 0 months to 48 months. And so you can see here, as kiddos are developing, they're developing skills very rapidly. And an infant from 0 to 8 months is completely dependent on a caregiver for feeding. And then if you look at the 8 to 18 months, this is where a child's starting to practice the skills that they're going to need for the next stage. And they're still needing help from us as caregivers, but they also need the chance to be able to make mistakes and to practice on their own. So at the 18 to 36 month stage, we begin to see that children discover for themselves how they can participate and how they can be independent. And independence is something that I think we all want for our kids. And so recognizing that comes at the 18 to 36 month stage is important for us to look for long-term growth for our kids. They begin to take ownership of the world around them, and they want to do more for themselves. So it's important to give them the chance to have that independence that they're really craving at that stage. So reminding ourselves at the end of the day, what's the goal for our kiddos? Do we want them to be dependent on us forever, or do we want them to be self-sufficient? So if we allow them the chance to practice being independent, then they're going to be more independent. It's kind of like raising the bar for them and letting them work towards that bar. But if we don't give them the chance to practice, then they're going to continue to rely on others, and eventually that'll lead to decreased self-esteem. So then looking at the 36 to 48 month stage, children should really be taking over the life skills of feeding for themselves. So we've gone from completely dependent to pretty much independent with just a little bit of supports from us in the physical development stage of feeding. Sometimes this can be difficult for us as parents because the time goes by so fast and we want them to just stay little forever. But if we keep in mind what the end goal is of independence, then that helps us to be able to refocus what our kiddos need at each of these stages. So now we're going to talk about receptive communication, and we're also going to talk about expressive communication. Again, looking at these different breakdowns of development, and the big idea here is to just see how much of a gap there is between receptive and expressive communication. So receptive communication is what our children are receiving from us, what they're listening to, what they're understanding. And you've probably even noticed that your child understands way more than they're able to express in the 2s and the 3s. And so this is going to be an important concept for us to think about later when we talk about behavior. Speech people, do you guys want to add anything about receptive communication in this age group?
Hi, Miss Quinn. Hi, families. Hi, students. It's Amelia Rao here, and I'm representing UTEP and our speech language pathology program. And right now, Miss Quinn, almost Dr. Quinn, is displaying some of the receptive communication. And I think the rule of thumb, like quote to hang on to, is receptive language precedes expressive. So you're stimulating, you're feeding the system, their understanding, their comprehension is taking off long before they produce these same concepts. And in developmental disabilities, we don't suspect an out of order acquisition. We still suspect a vertical alignment to what is happening in other general population language acquisition patterns. We expect that first comes reacting to sound. Next comes following simple commands and responding to name. Next comes imitating sounds, using gestures, vocalizations, and body language. Next comes more complexity and length. So we can still follow the same vertical path towards how we add length, complexity, and more vocabulary items. It's just that we have the delay. So it's not necessarily language disorder, out of order, but language delay. It's coming later than expected in our children with Down syndrome. But receptive precedes expressive. So keep feeding the comprehension, keep feeding the listening, keep stimulating those classic areas of language, whether it be via English, Spanish, gestures, sign language, visual supports. Keep giving all the modalities, sight, hearing. Give them everything they need about our shared symbol world. Receptive precedes expressive.
Thanks, Dr. Rao. And then comes the expressive piece, which is what our kids can start to tell us. And so if you look here at these developmental blocks of time from 0 to 8 months, our kiddos are using sounds. They're beginning to imitate single syllables like da, ma. But then look, by 36 to 48 months, they're starting to ask difficult questions, starting to describe things with multiple words, starting to describe feelings using abstract words, speaking in the past tense, and using approximately 4,000 plus words. So that's a huge amount of development that's happening in a short amount of time if you look at the big picture of things. And it's also important, I think, for us to understand that kids aren't really beginning to describe their feelings until 36 to 48 months. And so that's going to be important for us to think about too when we're looking at terrible 2 and 3-nager behavior. Anything that you want to add for expressive?
I think where your previous mantra is receptive precedes expressive, in the expressive domain, you want to think that out of insight precedes out of sight. So they can talk about the here and now much earlier, much sooner than they can abstract something in another room, something in another time dimension. So
And feelings.
and feelings, how they're feeling about the world. So the first thing that's going to come here is what's here in this room that I can see, touch, feel, sense, and I can describe. And later on, they can report things that have happened out of sight. So receptive precedes expressive, and then the here and now precedes the out of sight in expressive realms.
Thanks. Do any of the speech students have anything that they want to add? Last chance. Okay.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yes, thank you. So here we're looking at the social emotional development of 0 to 48 months. And what's important to remember here is that as children are developing, the more that they receive warm, consistent, responsive care, the better that they're going to develop their own sense of emotional security and confidence. That's going to allow them to continue to explore their world, try new things, get involved with different activities, and then forming relationships and friendships. So by establishing trust and emotional security, that's how these skills really develop for them to be more comfortable and confident, knowing that as they're experiencing these new things, they can also still look back to their caregivers for that safe support. Self-awareness and self-regulation are important developmental components that are happening during this time frame. And so us as caregivers can help guide the children in these areas by providing that emotional connection, teaching them words to go along with their bodies, to go along with their feelings, and encouraging children to express their ideas and their feelings openly. It's also important that we're teaching our kids about personal space, and that we're teaching them that it's okay to have preferences and it's okay to make connections with the world around them. But setting boundaries and using language to define boundaries is also really important to help create that self-regulation. So in looking at this development, it helps us to have a clear, realistic expectation for them, and it helps us to actively help develop that language and help them to be able to know how to express frustration. And so that's more for us to understand. Anything that you want to touch on there, Dr. Rao?
I think, I mean, these are also interrelated in early development. It's like, what's the point of learning a shared symbol like milk or papa, if we're speaking Spanish, if somebody's already giving it to me? So there's always that somebody. So if I can't manipulate that social emotional relationship in my life, why communicate? If I am not validated in my social emotional relationships, why even describe this internal sensation of discomfort or angst? So for me, in terms of communication, it's all super interrelated, and everything that we learn in terms of the world and how to communicate and connect with others within the human population, within our networks, is all about, I want to represent and manipulate my environment. So language, in my opinion, is a tool, and it gets all of these needs met in a lot of ways, but it's just hand in hand in this exponential explosion of growth during the first 2, 3, 4 years of life.
Thanks. Okay, so now we have our first opportunity for any questions that you guys might have about the developmental stages up to this point. Anyone, you can take yourself off mute if you have a question. Hey, if you think of it later, just type it into the chat so we don't forget. So now we're gonna talk about behaviors. And like Dr. Rao said, our kids are going to try to manipulate a situation and they're trying to get their needs met. Sometimes that is coming out in a behavior. But if we really ask ourselves, what are you trying to tell me in this behavior? Then that's how we determine the best way for us to respond. And so it's important to remember to respond and not react, because in the way that we respond, that really helps teach children the way that they can respond to their own feelings. So since 2- and 3-year-olds don't really have the verbal language skills, whether they are typically developing or whether they have Down syndrome, they're kind of in the same boat. They have these big emotions, but they don't really know how to communicate those emotions. They're going to use the best way that they know how. And so a lot of times that'll look like a tantrum or a flop and drop. And that's when they just kind of flop to the floor in refusal. You might have protest. No, I don't want to do that. We see biting and hitting as a form of communication also, because they don't really know how to say, I want you to share with me, or it's too loud. And so the most quick thing for them to do is to have a physical form of communication. And so it's just really important to understand that all of our kids are going through that at this stage. But if we think about determining the cause of the behavior, it'll help us understand the right way to respond to that behavior. So if you can remember the word cause, and that would stand for connection. And if your child is trying to get your attention in order to connect with you, you might see a behavior. If they're trying to gain access, they want something, a toy or something to eat, you might see a behavior to indicate that they're looking for access. Sometimes it's completely unexplained. We're not exactly sure in the very moment why a 2- or 3-year-old behavior is happening. And so that's when we kind of have to take a step back. And later when we look at some of the strategies, this is going to be when you have planned ignoring, or you maybe just give them a little break. Sensory. A lot of times our kiddos are seeking some sort of nice sensation. And it might not seem like a nice sensation to us, but it's a nice sensation for them. And so respecting their needs in that area. Or sometimes it's because they need to block out a negative emotion or a negative sensory experience. So if it's too loud and your child has an aversion to loud noises, they may bite somebody to let them know you're screaming and it's too loud and I can't take it. And then also sometimes the behavior might be because of escape. And it might be a difficult situation. It might be that they don't want to go to grandma's house. It might be because they don't want to do their work in school. But remembering that these are all forms of communication, and we can respond in the best way possible. Does anybody have any specific example that they want to maybe work through in thinking about one of these 5 reasons? Okay, so next we're going to talk about responding. Okay, so now that we kind of understand where the developmental milestones are happening for our kids, and we can understand, okay, if I think about what they're really trying to communicate to me, then I have a better chance of responding more appropriately to their needs. So during this developmental stage, it's supernatural. This is where kids have to test boundaries to find out what their limits are. This is how they learn about authority, and this is how they define what they can and cannot get away with. So in thinking of boundaries, if we think of a child's day as a road or a path, as their behavior or what they're doing gets too close to one side or the other side of that path, we really want to give them strategies to get back into the middle of that roadway. And so one of the things we can do is give them choices, not allowing them to continue to get farther off the path, but giving them choices to get back closer to the middle. It's also our job to call them out. And sometimes this can be hard for parents as their kiddo is learning how to negotiate. 2- and 3-year-olds are the best manipulators. And I don't say that in a mean way, but it's absolutely true. They're learning how to develop that manipulation. They might ask mom for a cookie and mom says no, and they run into the other room and they ask older brother or sister, hey, can I have a cookie? And they get it. And so they're learning very quickly who allows them to get away with what. Super smart about that. And so it's okay to call them out on it and say, I know you went to the other room to ask your brother, and that's not okay. So in us providing the words that go along with the situation and the feelings that they might be having, we're really teaching them how to respond to their own emotions. Giving choices that you determine that you're okay with and that are acceptable no matter what they choose is super important. So you wouldn't want to say, well, do you want to go to bed right now, or do you want to watch a show, if you're not ready to go ahead and put them to bed at that time, if that's what they ended up to choose. So you always need to be in control of the choices that you give, and give choices that are okay no matter what they decide. And then just always remembering that toddlers' emotions are super big to them. They're sometimes enormous, and yet they don't have the expressive vocabulary to let you know what those emotions are. Okay, so then we have tantrums. Tantrums are a behavior that I'm sure you've all seen before. And maybe sometimes we don't really realize that there's 2 different types of tantrums. Tantrums can be emotional and they can be non-emotional. So some interesting statistics that might make you feel better as parents: 87% of toddlers that are in the 18 to 24 month stage display tantrums. Totally normal. 91% of toddlers in the 30 to 36 month range have tantrums. And 59% of toddlers 42 to 48 months steadily decrease in the amount of tantrums that they have. And that's because at 18 to 24 months, they're just starting to understand their independence. At 30 to 36 months, they're really trying to take control of that independence. And then us as adults and caregivers in their lives, we're giving them strategies to help them move out of the tantrum stage. So approximately 5 to 7% of children between the ages of 1 and 3 experience temper tantrums 3 or more times a week. And they usually last at least 15 minutes. At least 20% of 2-year-olds have temper tantrums on a daily basis. And so if you think about this as an opportunity to model for them the appropriate way and give them the tools that they need, you're going to help them in that development. But if we don't give them the chance to practice these strategies and to deal with how they're feeling, it's going to be more difficult for them to move past this tantrum stage. It's absolutely okay to let a toddler work through the tantrum on their own, providing a safe environment. Sometimes you have to pay the least amount of attention to them as possible, especially if what they're trying to do is gain your attention or get their way. And so also knowing the difference between emotional tantrums and non-emotional tantrums. is important because emotional tantrums are a result of needs not being met, like being tired or being hungry. But non-emotional tantrums are when a tantrum comes from not getting what they want, a power struggle, or in manipulation. So non-emotional tantrums are results of wants not being met. If you are experiencing continuous non-emotional tantrums from your child, that's usually a result of us as adults. And these kind of tantrums will continue until they don't work anymore. So to extinguish the behavior that you see in a non-emotional tantrum, it really takes you being consistent in the way that you respond. So it's especially important to not give in to a toddler's non-emotional demands, because if you give in, you've just taught them that it works. I like this visual a lot too, because it just kind of gives us an idea of a tantrum versus a meltdown. A meltdown might start as a tantrum and then escalate to a physical shutdown. You might not be able to identify any motives, no goal. They're not really trying to get something or make something happen. They've just simply lost all control, and it might not be easy to understand what's happening. And that would be like in the red area of the toddler thermometer. The orange area would be more of a tantrum. Those are driven by will. They want something. You can usually diffuse it with emotional regulation support, with redirection, with acknowledging feelings and giving them choices. But the other really important thing about this visual is that you want to say the least amount possible when your child is in the orange or the red zone. Think about us as adults. When we're like really, really mad, how often do we want to hear somebody tell us what we did wrong or what we could do better? You know, we're already on overload internally, and we're like in shutdown mode, right? So also noticing that the right time to talk to your toddler, or maybe to give another alternative behavior, would be when they're down in the green state. So sometimes you have to let them go through their tantrum before you can actually work out the problem. In looking at what's happening specifically in the brain, we have 3 types of a brain, or toddlers are using 3 types of their brain during a tantrum: the thinking brain, the emotional brain, and the survival brain. And the thinking brain is in charge of logical reasoning, making choices on their own. But in a tantrum, and especially in a meltdown, the stress hormone that's released from a tantrum does not allow the thinking brain to work. So the thinking brain is shut off, and the emotional brain kicks into gear. And that's the middle layer, which is really regulating those positive and negative emotions. And so during tantrums, when that stress hormone is released, they bypass the thinking brain, and they're just working on positive and negative emotions. So this is also why it's important to remember that toddlers don't see attention as positive attention or negative attention until you start to show them that negative attention comes with a consequence, or something that they don't really like, something that's uncomfortable for them. So if they're in a tantrum and you give in, you've actually shown them that a tantrum gets them a positive reaction instead of a negative reaction. When we're in full-on meltdown mode, the survival brain kicks in, and that's just like automatic body functions. And so no thinking is really happening at this stage at all. So you might even be thinking that you should avoid tantrums because it's easier for you, or you're in public and you don't want people to look at you funny. But in actuality, tantrums are desirable. because that's when you get to help teach toddlers emotional development. And it's dangerous in this time frame to avoid power struggles altogether, because you're really taking away that opportunity to practice and give strategies to your toddlers. So how dare you say that tantrums are a good thing? Well, learning how to regulate emotions in the tantrum stage allows proper brain cell connections to form. So as they're in this fight or flight mode, or they're in the thinking brain mode, and you're able to give them positive redirection, a safe place to manage their own emotions, you're actually allowing the brain to make connections in the moment of how they should respond or react to their feelings. These neural pathways are essential to managing stress and being assertive later on in life. So when kids are not given opportunities to learn regulating skills, they can have a really hard time later in life with social, emotional, and stress regulation. So if we fix the problem for a kiddo in a tantrum, we're not really giving them the skills to fix their own problems. We've taught them to rely on others. And the older they get, the harder that's going to be for people to step in and help them, because it's perfectly acceptable for toddlers to go through this stage right now, and people are understanding and they know, oh, that's a 2 or a 3-year-old. But when they're 8, 9, or 10 and they're throwing a tantrum in the store, that's really when people are going to look like, oh, what's going on here? So just remember that it's practice that helps kids learn. And so that includes practicing working through emotions. Now let's think about us as the adults in a tantrum. Kids are going to recognize changes in our body language, changes in our facial expressions, and changes in our tone of voice before they ever hear anything that we say. So part of responding instead of reacting means that we're aware of our own body language, our own facial expressions, and our own tone of voice. So this signal to kids, by staying calm, by getting down at their eye level, and using a more serious tone of voice, will help alert a child of how you're responding in a safe and loving way. Anything, Dr. Rao, that you want to mention about that piece, as far as like saying less is more?
I mean, I just love it. I think 80%, whether we're 2, 3, or 30 or 40 years old, 80% of what we're communicating is body language. It's not this sound by sound by sound by sound oral language. So be very cautious, and I'm loving everything you're saying, Jessica, that every family and every even, adult who's trying to stay emotionally regulated can benefit from. It's great.
And we can all be 2 or 3 again in our lives, in different situations. So sometimes I revert back to my three-nager stage. So, okay, now we know that this is all acceptable. This is all part of learning for our kiddos. What do we do to help them? What do we do to give them strategies? We really want to remember that their desire is to be independent, but they need supports to learn what that independence should look like that's socially, behaviorally appropriate. So we want to think of ways that we can empower our child, but not give away that authority. You have to be the one that's in charge. Learning about authority during this age really sets your child up for success or failure for the rest of their life. If bad habits start right now, where your 2 or 3-year-old thinks that they're in charge and they get to be the one that makes all the decisions, it's going to be really hard to regain that authority later on in life when they're bigger and stronger and have more to say. So it's really, really important for you to remember that I can empower my kid without giving up the control. So some of the ways that you can do that are by giving choices. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. Make sure that when you're giving choices, there are two choices that you're okay with. Two choices that are still within the bounds of what you want them to do. So an easy example is when we have a kiddo at ELB that maybe doesn't want to transition to the next activity. We may use two techniques together, a give choice and a distraction at the same time. And we may say, well, do you want to run to the bathroom or do you want to hop like a bunny to the bathroom? Now, if I say, do you want to run to the bathroom? Everybody else has to know in the school that since I gave them that choice, you can't then take it back and say, no running in school. So being on the same page with each other within your household or within the environment that you're in is also important when you're giving choices. That was kind of a distraction example as well, because the thing was, I don't want to go, but I distracted with giving choices. So sometimes those things can work together. Sometimes a distraction can be something totally different. You're ready to go to bed and kiddo doesn't want to go to bed, and maybe you distract them by saying, do you want to turn on the night light tonight? Or did you see that? Or, just something to kind of get the brain to think in another direction than, no, I don't want to do that. Applying acceptance. So accepting that your child is also trying to make decisions for their self, and accepting that sometimes they're just going to need a moment to have a tantrum, and that's okay. Respecting their feelings. So you can be respectful and acknowledge their feelings without giving away the power and the control. So a lot of times this has to do with refusals, when someone's refusing something, and you can tell them, I understand that you don't want to do this right now. And sometimes you get to make choices and sometimes you don't. Right now you need to, and then whatever it is that you want them to follow through with. The fantasy pause is something that I forget to use all the time, but it comes from the Love and Logic series, and it's a fantastic series. If any of you are interested, I highly recommend downloading it or just listening to it on your drive. Some of you that have a long drive. The fantasy pause is where you just sit down and join your kid on the floor while they're having a tantrum, and you're telling them, it sure would be nice if we could get ice cream right now before dinner, but then we might get a stomach ache, and then a stomach ache wouldn't really be that fun. And you're not really talking to them about it, but you're having your own out loud fantasy of what it is that they want, and then talking it through about why it's not really a good idea or why they can't have whatever that thing is that they want. It can also be a distraction to get them to think about something else. It's important to be honest, and honest with them about their feelings, and sometimes using a whisper can really help de-escalate a situation. And this works wonders even with adults when giving directions for adults. If you just start to whisper, everyone leans in, stop, because they want to know what you're saying. So that's a really good technique as well. Sometimes the best thing to do is to walk away or to have planned ignoring. So if your child's doing something to get attention from you and you don't want to encourage that by giving them the attention, whether it's positive or negative attention, you might need to walk away. Negotiation and follow through. So this is kind of known as a bribe to some of us. And let's just be honest, even as adults, I like to get bribed sometimes, you know. I might not want to do something, but knowing that I'll get something that I do want in the end, I might be willing to go ahead and do whatever it is that I'm supposed to do. So keep in mind that negotiation and follow through is not off the table, but you want to use it very planned and sparingly. You don't want to always be bribing your kid. And you also want to try to use the negotiation as something that is an internal motivator instead of giving them material things. A lot of times, like in the store, if a kiddo wants a candy and you're going through the line and they really want the candy, if you give in that one time, they're going to expect it every single time you go to the store. So just keep that in mind as you're negotiating. You might have a snack in the car, and instead of having the candy bar as you're leaving the store, I have gummies in the car, and you can have a gummy as soon as we get to the car. And then also losing privileges. That's a part of life, and that's something that also needs to be practiced for our kiddos. And so sometimes losing a privilege and having that consequence that goes along with that behavior is teaching them the negative aspect of the behavior. The most important thing is to be consistent. So if sometimes this behavior works for me, I'm going to keep doing it. So it's not going to be extinguished completely until it no longer works for me at all. So if every time I don't want to do something, I stop and drop on the floor, and then I get picked up and carried, I'm going to keep doing that. If I want to be carried, if I don't want to walk. But if my environment is safe enough for the person that I want to carry me, and they just walk away and they have planned ignoring, eventually I'm going to be like, well, hey, I want to come too. And I will get up and I will walk to wherever the family is. So it's just important to, every time behavior happens, you react or you respond in the same way. So these are some of the resources that I use all the time. I especially love the Love and Logic. This is by a father and a son. I used this with my daughter when she was little, and they've come out with a new one that includes like technology and social media, and so I actually downloaded the newer version and listened to it again, and I just think it's really helpful because it's a very loving and nurturing way to parent. And then a lot of the things that I said were specific to kids with Down syndrome, but all kids are really in this developmental stage together. So something that works with a child with Down syndrome also works for a typically developing child. I use the supporting positive behavior in children and teens with Down syndrome all the time. I was really disappointed that publishing company went out of business, because now it's really hard to get that book. So I have a search on eBay that alerts me every time that book comes up, and I grab a copy because I'm constantly having parents read that. And then I myself, when I have a specific child in mind or a specific behavior in mind, I'll flip through and I'll try to remind myself of some of the strategies that really work. So with that being said, that's pretty much the end of what I have to talk about. Do you guys have any questions or comments about behavior? The last couple of things that I'm sorry, did somebody?
Yeah, I'd like to add something.
Okay.
On the slide for your strategies to empower, I just want to add that you really helped me through my word choice that I use with my daughter. Anytime my daughter is having a tantrum or a meltdown, or, you know, trying to get her way, Jessica really helped me change my vocabulary. I I was really struggling with saying good girl and bad girl to her to help her try to distinguish, what her behavior was, which side of the spectrum her behavior was on. And Jessica gave me a much better word choice. Because when I was saying good girl and bad girl, it also made me feel really bad as a parent, like thinking, oh my gosh, why is my daughter being so bad? Or, why do I have a bad kid? But Jessica changed my word choice to be whether the child is making good decisions or bad decisions. And that very simple change in wording changed my whole perspective as a parent, but it also helped my communication with my daughter a lot better as well. So I just wanted to add that and help others see how you helping me change my word choice is also a great empowerment tool.
Yeah, thank you. And it's important to remember that these behaviors are normal. So it's not really a bad girl or a good girl.
Right.
It's behavior and choices. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So I am going to leave you guys with 2 resources. Children really also need to have good models of emotional support and emotional language when they're not having a hard time. So the best way to build that foundation, since we can't really talk to them about it in the middle of a tantrum, we're helping them work through a tantrum, the best time to really give them the language that goes with emotion is when everything's golden. And so using books with children to really talk about emotional language is very, very helpful. So I know this is small, but I can email anyone this presentation that wants it. Also, since it'll be available on YouTube, you can always zoom in. And then there's the link that's there. So if anyone wants to capture a screenshot, you can go ahead and capture a screenshot as well. But CLI is a resource that I have used for years. It is a free resource to teachers and to parents. So I highly encourage you to go to this next link, or since it's not an active link for you on Zoom, look up CLI Engage Family Resources, because if you are wanting some strategies, there's lots of videos that will give you ideas, that will give you activities that you can do. And it's just a really great resource. So I encourage you to go to CLI Engage for parents and create a login. It's completely free, and you'll have access to a lot of really, really great developmental resources. Okay. So now let me see if thank you. Thank you, Amelia. And Lydia, you have a question?
Tammy did, but I don't, let me see. Yeah, I guess it's a little unclear on the direct words that you were saying, like it's a good decision, bad decision, good choice, bad choice.
Yeah. Tracy, do you want to kind of talk about how you work through that?
Yeah, so instead of telling my daughter, when she's in the moment, I used to say things like, why are you being a bad girl? Or, bad girls don't get whatever, the tablet or the toy. And my language was always around, why are you being a bad girl? Or why are you not being a good girl? And it wasn't working for me. And so changing the sentence to say, you're not making very good choices right now. Instead of saying you're being a bad girl, I've changed it to say you're not making good choices right now. And instead of saying bad girls don't get the tablet, now I say, kids who make good choices get the tablet, or kids who don't make good choices don't get the tablet. And so it became something more about the choice she was making in the instant, And that clicked for both me and her. It was about the choice she was making right then and there, rather than just an overall perspective of her being good or bad, which was a lot bigger of a thing to be thinking about. And saying the word choice instead of good girl, bad girl made it just be an in the moment, what's happening right now in the moment. And it really has helped us out a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
you kind of also alluded, Tracy, to good girls or good choices lead to a tablet. You
Mhm.
also, when you're talking, you want to tell kids what you want them to do instead of telling them, no, don't run. Instead of saying it in that way, the last thing they heard was run. And so on their brain is now run. And so a better thing to do would be to tell them what you want them to do. So walking feet. And so really thinking about your own language and telling them what they should be doing will result in them thinking about what they should be doing. Now they could still make a choice, right? And then you're back to the, you should make a good choice right now. A good choice would be to run or to hop. A good choice would be to put your glasses on your face, And so just really thinking about that language and how you're leading them on that path, right? To make the good decision.
Yeah, that strategy, the telling them what you want them to do instead of what you don't want them to do, is something that really changed for Noah. Because like you were saying earlier, positive and negative reactions to them are the same. So if I'm like big mad or big happy at him, either way he gets excited. He's happy either way because he just wants the reaction. And that wasn't working, I mean, the hitting, the pinching and all that was, I mean, it got worse. And then I changed it to, don't react to this and get really excited when he does this, and
Right.
doing walking feet instead of no, don't run, or like when I tell him, because he pinches me and then he laughs, and it's like, no, that's not funny. Well, he laughs because all he hears is funny.
Yeah.
So I just have to change that phrasing, and yeah, that's something that kind of
And I think remembering too that your tone of voice will have a big impact, so you can say, oh, Noah, don't pinch me. And it sounds like, okay, I can pinch, but if you're real stern and you say, don't pinch me, it has a different reaction than saying it nice. And so sometimes we kind of feel bad at, being stern, but it's actually going to hit their brain easier and faster if they also get that auditory cue. So it's not the words that they're taking in, but it's the tone that they're taking in first. Hi, Willa. Yeah. Well, do you guys have any more questions or comments? We're about at that time. I'm happy to stay on with anyone that does have more questions or comments, and the link is in the chat for anybody that wants that. And Alejandra, I will definitely send you an email.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Yes. Thank you guys. I appreciate your time and joining us here. And like I said in the very beginning, this is a recorded Zoom. I am going to download it or upload it to our YouTube channel so that you can refer back to it later. If you did come in late, no worries. You'll still have access to all of it. And feel free to share it with other people. Really having a community of family support with each other is important. It's important for you, for your emotional health, and it's also important for us to build that toolbox. So I leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everybody.